Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Wire. Thank you for joining us. And thank you very much to my friends who are joining me live today, Daniela and Rachel. Thank you for being here. What's the topic of discussion today? Today we are talking about the little requirement in Standard 7, which is all about agreed standards and guidelines. And we see some gaps there sometimes, so we thought that we would have a yarn about how to meet that and see if we get some examples on how people are meeting that. I will invite people as they arrive. I would like to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land. I'm on the beautiful land of the Biripi people here in my hometown of Port Macquarie. And I would like to acknowledge their elders, the keepers of knowledge. And I would like to acknowledge their deep connection to the land and waters here, and also appreciate and respect the diversity of Aboriginal culture right across all of the lands that you might be sitting on whilst you are watching this webinar. And pay our respects to your First Nations traditional custodians of that land. Agreed standards and guidelines. Agreed practice standards and guidelines. Now, that can mean many, many things. And it does mean many, many things. So that's good news for you because you've got a big, wide range of evidence that you could present to us. And this is very contextual. So it's very much about you and how you roll. Now, some organisations are given a very clear directive in their funding and service agreements with their various funders on the guidelines that they must implement. I'm thinking about specialist homelessness services, for example. In each state they are given some fairly strict guidelines that they must follow, and those guidelines are updated all the time and released by the various funders under a sort of variation to your agreement. So there's a really good source of what the must-dos in terms of practice guidelines as one source. But other organisations we've seen, they look to their peak body to do research and evaluation. Sometimes they'll have university partners, research partners that help them to identify contemporary best practice in a certain space. For example, the peak body, the National Alcohol and Drug Association, has worked with a range of universities and pulled together some practice guidelines for working with culturally and linguistically diverse people in mental health settings. Right? So, that's an interesting piece of work there that you could use as practice guidance. And there's more that I have helpfully put onto a page of links that you can take a deeper dive if you're looking and you're interested. So that's all there for you. But today, I'm just going to share my screen with you and we will just have a look at what we might be talking about today. We're going to identify what service standards and guidelines are. The requirement is in the standards that they be, I need to let some people in first. Hang on a second. Hello, Carol. Hello, Laura. Lovely to have you here.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
We're going to talk today about what are service standards and guidelines. We are going to have a look at the requirements in this indicator, which says agreed service standards and guidelines are designed, piloted, and evidence-based. That's quite a specific requirement, isn't it? So we'll have a look at some evidence examples. We'll have a look at gaps we sometimes see in this standard, and I am sharing with you some helpful links. All right, so that's how we roll today. This is what it says at the standard level. So it sits in the Service Outcome Standard, which is Standard 7 of the Australian Service Excellence Framework, and it's Standard 7.1. It's called Outcomes Monitored Standard. And the standard means that service outcomes are planned, they're monitored, and they're subject to ongoing review. All right. So I suppose what it's saying is that there is an intent and that it happens in a planned and targeted way, these service outcomes, not just by accident, not in an ad hoc way. So, you sort of set an objective and then you go about achieving that objective and you measure whether or not you've achieved that objective. All right. So when it comes to outcomes, client outcomes, this will be, how many people you're seeing, to what standard you're providing that service, and is anyone better off? So a little bit of measuring the impact, if you like, which is beyond the outcome, isn't it? So it's the impact in that person's life. So we're just sort of moving now in our sort of sector to better impact measurement. We're sort of sitting still at the outcomes measurement stage, aren't we? So the intent of this standard is that stakeholders are satisfied with service outcomes which are reflective and responsive to need, which changes all the time, doesn't it? The needs of your community, the needs of the people that come to your service are many and varied. So this standard requires you to be taking a look at that and seeing how you're responding. And 7.1.6 specifically talks about having agreed service standards and having guidelines that guide your ways of working, guide your practice, and that they are designed, piloted, and evidence-based. So we'll have a look at the evidence guide now, shall we? I might pop the evidence guide into the chat for those of you that don't have it sitting there on your desk. Let me just go and pick that up for you and pop it into the chat. The evidence guide is a very helpful document for those of you who are preparing for service excellence, who come across something in their self-assessment that go, oh, what does that mean? I'm not quite sure what that means. It's a good place to go to the evidence guide. Here it comes. It's a big document, so it might take a little while to download for you. And I'm going to open up mine as well, and I might share the screen in case you don't feel like doing it yourself. There we go. And we're going down to Standard 7. What's that means? Self-one, this indication is on 74. What's the guidance here? So in the middle column there's some explainer, and on the right-hand side is the list of evidence that might be useful for you. It says service standards, for example, homelessness, child and family support service standards, are data-informed, developed, piloted and documented and promoted. So your practice guidance, the way that you work with your clients needs to be written down. And piloted sort of means that there's some sort of testing that goes on. So there's some monitoring an evaluation of the kind of outcomes that you're achieving. Data informed. So that is the crux of the evidence base that you're looking for, is that you are collecting data that tells you about the outcomes that you're achieving. Now, many of you will be using client records management systems that help you to generate reports that would show you that a little bit, show you how many anyway, and maybe the sort of characteristics of those clients. And some of them do a good job of tracking well-being, for example, and achievement of goals, for example. Some of them do a good job of that. Other more manual systems that you might be using may not be doing such a great job of that. It might be harder for you to extract that data about how well you are going in terms of meeting the needs of your clients. But very few organisations that we meet, very few, have an evaluation framework that's implemented in practice. So they have a framework for evaluating not only outcomes, but impact. So very, very few. That's a gap that we often see. It's not specifically a gap here if you don't have an evaluation framework, but it is a gap in another of the indicators in this standard. So I'll show you that in a moment. Outputs towards consumer outcomes should be measured for quality and quantity. So if we've set some standards around our services to clients, that these would be monitored, and these would be metrics that tell us, how well we're doing. We go down a little bit further here. Is there anything else there? Yes, there is. Key performance indicators or key performance measures should be monitored over time to observe trends and potential areas for improvement. All right, so we've got some standards, we've got some metrics for measuring them. We keep an eye on how well we're progressing, and we make changes based on the data that we're seeing there. That's really what this indicator is looking for. Some of the examples of evidence there would be, policies and procedures that guide you in terms of how you must do things and what you must have in place. Child safe policy procedures, standards around things you might deliver, such as training courses, code of conduct, diversity inclusion policies, MOUs and service agreements. That is not the best list of evidence. I'm going to give you a better list. So I'm going to stop sharing that with you now, because I think that list of evidence can be a little misleading if you sort of treated it as a checklist. So don't do that. Don't ever treat the evidence guide as a checklist. It's just examples. So what do we mean? What do we mean by service standards? We're going to have a go at this. So the people that are in the room at the moment, you can give me some ideas in a moment. Service standards are clear and measurable statements on the level of service a client can expect. Clear and measurable statements on the level of service a client can expect. So everyone that's in the room, if you have an idea about a level of service that a client can expect, what are your examples? So you're saying either internally and externally. So if a client can expect this level of service, you certainly should be telling them what it is in a sort of client charter, for example, or in some sort of agreement that you have with them as your client. But what are some of those service standards that you set yourself as an organisation? Usually there's going to be a number around it. It's going to be this many of these, or within this time frame, or every 3 months, or right? Think about it like that. It's a metric. It has a metric around it. Can you think of any? I've seen some when it comes to intake. What might be the service standard around intake that you've heard of?
Marie, I'm not an expert at this, but our care finders, from the first point of reference, from the time that we receive a referral, there's documentation of how long it took us to respond to the referral, how long it takes for us to set the client up, when they get their first service, when they get their service actually delivered. So there's a whole,
Perfect.
and there's documentation of the time that takes. You have to say whether it was 1 week between the first referral coming through and the first contact made, and how many people fit into that, how many took longer than that, and that sort of thing. So is that what you meant? Yeah.
It's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that is a service delivery standard. I feel like you've set that for yourself as an organisation. That's not something that the funder would say you must within these timeframes, but sometimes they do set those kinds of KPIs.
Hmm.
That's exactly it. So that's fantastic. Other examples of where you've got a metric or a standard around an aspect of your service delivery. What about review of the case plan? A lot of organisations have periodic review of the case plan, and good practice as a guide would be at least every couple of months if you're working with a client over a long period of time. If you're working more intensively, you might have a standard that says we're going to review the case plan with the client every fortnight or even every week. All right. There will even be service standards around your hours of operation. Sometimes this is dictated by the funder, right? There might be service standards around how many times a person can come and get material aid in a particular period if you give out material aid. Okay, so it could also be a service standard around this is the type of behaviour, and we would bar a client if there was this kind of behaviour. That is a form of a service standard, right? So, if a client demonstrates these behaviours, then we do this, or this is where the bar is. Wherever you're talking about, this is where the bar is. That's the service standard. So, service standard might be clients can stay with us for up to 6 weeks. You see that? There's generally a measurable metric in there somewhere. And then you can, if you have a standard like that, clients can stay in our refuge for up to 6 weeks, then you can measure that, you can monitor that. You can say, well, this many clients moved out for 6 weeks, this many clients stayed beyond that 6 weeks. You see that? And you can adjust your service accordingly. You might need to say, well, we need to extend our stay out to 8 weeks. And that's the kind of story we're looking for when we're looking for evidence against this indicator. We're looking for you to use that data to tell you a story about how you need to provide a responsive service. All right, so some organisations document their service standards in a client charter or in an agreement that they have with clients that everybody signs. Sometimes it's in a high-level guiding document such as service governance framework. Right, so it should be written down. And I think if it's about standards of service delivery, it should also be shared with the client as good practice. Yeah. Good job, everyone. If any other ideas come to you about service standards, you can put them. Maybe you do checks every so often on certain things. Every month we do this, or every 4 weeks we do that, or every year we do this. They're going to be service standards, okay? If they're about service delivery. Yeah. And these are the ways that we get quality outcomes with our clients, is we set these sort of, high standards and we aim to meet them. We measure when we're falling short or where we're exceeding, and we use that data to inform our service development. So it's important, isn't it, in terms of the quality system? Yeah. Let me go back here. The other question was, where are these standards documented in your organisation? So you want to think about where you've written them down and how easy they are for people to find and read and interpret. And are they shared with clients? All right. So what are the ways that we're sharing with clients the kinds of level of service that we aspire to offer them? Yeah, that's nice accountability with our clients, isn't it? Working in partnership with them. And guidelines. Now, guidelines will be slightly different. Guidelines would be those kinds, I'm going to call these practice guidelines. And these are some contemporary practice guidelines that we see in most of the organisations that we work with. All right, so they're sometimes called practice principles, or they're sometimes called ways of working, but this is what the framework is referring to. They're referring to these kinds of guidelines. So if you had a list of these in your service delivery policy or in your service governance framework, wherever it is you've written down the ways you're going to work with your clients and community, these might be some of the things that you would have as headings. Are there any others that you work to? Those of you that work with older people, are there any other guidelines that you use to guide your practice?
Do you mean like as in the aged care strength and standards?
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So you might be working to the aged care standards.
Yep.
And they'll have some practice principles in there, such as, choice. Dignity of risk is another one that's often used, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes. And there are also guidelines around restrictive practice. That's another one. All right. But these are some of the biggies I can think of that would be very informative, in terms of the way that we work or our practice, isn't it? So, these are a lot of organisations that we work with have documented these guidelines, or they have used um, evidence-based best practice guidelines that they've been able to get from their peak body or their industry. Okay. We, as assessors, we work to a deed of agreement that we have with the owners of the framework. So we have our own good practice guidance, and that good practice guidance is found in our deed of agreement. And in our deed of agreement, we have KPIs, which are all of the metrics that our performance will be measured against. So, we've got to attend this many meetings per year, and we've got to provide our reports within a certain time frame. And there's a report structure that we have to adhere to in terms of what's included in the report. All of our assessors have to have certain levels of qualification. There's an assessor code of conduct, code of ethics that we have to sign. We have to abide the child safety standards and promote them. We have to promote the information sharing guidelines. We have to work to the privacy legislation. We all have to be culturally aware, and we have to show evidence of our training in working culturally safe ways. We have to do trauma responsiveness training. And we have to implement practices in our organisation that comply with the cybersecurity essential eight, as a standard for cybersecurity. So that's an example of, in our world, the guidelines that we have to work to, the standards and guidelines that we have to work to. I'm just admitting Marianne. Here's an example. Here we go. Oh, where is it? Oh, gee, what's that? Half my slide's missing. That's all right. I'll get out of there and I'll share the actual document with you online. I found a really good example of some um, practice guidelines. And let me just get that open for you on my screen and I'll share it with you. I see what's happened. Hello, Marianne.
Hello, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone.
Nice to see you. Oh, there it is. It's the DV New South Wales Good Practice Guidelines. And I'm just going to open it up and share that with you. And the reason I like this one, apart from the fact that when you go to their Domestic Violence New South Wales website, you can easily find these good practice guidelines. They have the whole document, they have a video introducing it, and they have this sort of at a glance poster. And so the good practice guidelines include these foundational concepts. Let me blow that up a little bit for you so we can see it a bit better. So their framework, good practice guidelines, has these foundational concepts for working with women in domestic and family violence support services. So you see here, our ways of working are understanding domestic and family violence as a gendered issue, intersectional feminism, cultural safety, victim survivor centred practice and empowerment, trauma and gender violence informed approach, human rights, social justice, and child aware and parent sensitive practice. So those are the practice principles, or they're calling them foundational concepts, that they're promoting to all of the domestic and family violence funded organisations that are part of their membership. So Domestic Violence New South Wales is a peak body. And then you can see that they've got 9 principles or 9 sort of elements to their framework. And they've explained them there, what that sort of looks like in practice. You see that? So, you know, if you're a part of this membership of this peak body, you could and you would probably be expected to sign up and work to these principles, to this practice guidance. But whatever sector you work in, you'll probably be able to find some practice guidance that's relevant to your sector that has been developed in your sector with consultation from the people in your sector. Now, that's the stuff where we're getting towards the evidence base. So what I liked also that I found in that document was at the end, they expressed the evidence base that they had. So they expressed all of the research that it was based on, so that you know that it's contemporary and it's up to date. And this is best practice, means this is the knowledge that we have right now. The knowledge that we have right now says this is the best way to do it. And that's what's meant by, you know, evidence-based best practice, is that it's researched. You know, it's peer reviewed. It goes through that whole process to be able to find the guidance that's the best way to do it right now. Or evidence-based might mean that there's a source of data that tells us that this is the way we should go. Right? So whatever you decide your source of truth is, that's the evidence that we're talking about, the evidence-based. It's not just the CEO read something in a magazine on a plane one day and came back and said, hey, we should do it like this. No. But that could happen, couldn't it? So I've given you a list of some really good examples like that, and you will find some very common elements across all of that practice guidance. You'll find the evidence base, so it will be researched, and you should be able to find that the references for the research. If it's contemporary best practice guidelines that you found, it will be based on research. So you should be able to see the source of all of those. And you should be able to see the underpinning principles, such as trauma-informed and person-centred and culturally safe, and all those things we had a look at in that previous example. We recently had an opportunity to develop a service governance framework for an organisation, which was a really fantastic project to work on because we got to develop it with the organisation, and it was all about their ways of working. But it had all those elements in it. It had it had a section on ways of working, and it listed all of that practice guidance. It had a section on all of the standards and legislation that we have to be compliant with. It had attached to it program guidelines or program logic for each of their programs, right? So each of their programs is quite different, and so we help them to develop that sort of theory of change and program logic for each program. And then it referenced some higher level policies and procedures in the organisation that everybody had to sign up to. So it had a look at organisational quality guiding documents and then program level quality guiding documents. And then at the end, it had all the ways that we were going to measure how well we were doing with all of that. So that's yet to be implemented, we shall see. It's only a good looking document at the moment, but that's our part of the project done. So implementing it will be a different story, but we hope that that's where it goes. The gaps we see, people are usually able to tell us the sort of practice guidance that they use. They're able to say, well, we work in client-centred ways, we work in trauma-informed ways, and we work in culturally safe ways. They're usually able to tell us that, but it's not always well documented. Like we would be able to see evidence of them doing that sort of training. Maybe they're doing diversity training, they're doing trauma-informed training, they're doing the training there, but it's not really documented as a commitment by the organisation. So sometimes we find that the documentation of all of this is missing. Some organisations do a great job and they document their practice model and they have their program logic in there and they have their theory of change in there and they have all of their measurements for how they're going to measure outcomes and impact. So sometimes we do see some shining examples of that, but oftentimes we find it's a bit underbaked. We certainly don't see evaluation frameworks very often. If there's anyone in the room who's got an evaluation framework in their organisation and, they're using it successfully, it's something they sort of brought in. We'd love to hear about that. We'd love to hear examples. Some organisations use the results-based accountability framework. Carol might know about that, being that it was born in South Australia, or Laura. Results-based accountability framework's a lovely one to look up. If you would like to have an evaluation or impact measurement framework to have a look at your service delivery outcome, it's a great one. And there's lots of reference material and easy to get started toolkits around the results-based accountability framework. In South Australia, so some good things coming out of South Australia. It's available for everyone, but the Social Impact Framework, or SIF, is also a great tool and toolkit. It's easily available, Social Impact Framework, for measuring impact at the community level. So determinants of community wellbeing, for example. In the list of links I've given you, there's another similar framework for measuring community wellbeing out of Victoria, and that's a whole toolkit as well. So you've got some things there from us that you might be interested in having a look at, which might even just be the framework for how you put your practice guidance together. The minimum, what we would like you to do is to list your ways of working, right? So We love these kinds of practice models. We like to work, we're client-centered, we're trauma-informed, we're culturally inclusive. We like you to have written all that down. And if there are any standards of practice that you've implemented, or models of practice that you're working to, write those down as well. How's that feel? What are your questions about any of this? Sometimes it's in your service agreement, so that's a good place to start.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, Marie. You've got everything in that service agreement, haven't you? And there's all the activity work reports, and that's all your measuring and evaluation and things like that. But it's quite transparent back to the grant funders, but not necessarily to other aspects of our organisation. And I'm just thinking about your annual reports and all that sort of stuff too, the impact statements.
Well, we find that organisations are very, very good at promoting their numbers. Like, we saw this many clients, we gave out this many food parcels, and this many of that, and that many of that. And that's one part of certainly impact evaluation. How many did we do? But that's outputs, isn't it? It's not really outcomes, it's not really impact. So this is an outcomes measured standard. Standard 7.1 says outcomes are measured. And that information is used to improve our service, to make sure that our service is really responding to need. So if you're going to measure anything, you need to have a framework and some indicators of success that you've listed for yourself. So that's really what we're talking about. Right? It's no point looking back and saying, oh, wow, we happen to accidentally be good. Look at this, and people are happy. That's loose. What you want to say is, this is what we're aiming to achieve. This is what we're aiming to deliver. This is how we're going to measure it. This is how we're going to monitor it. We're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to see how well we're doing. And that data is going to tell us a story about where our improvement opportunities are. Without that, you're ad hoc. You're ad hoc. There's no, you're not planning, and you're not sort of setting out with any intent. You might actually just be, doing the bare minimum that's in your funding agreement. We often see that. Well, we're not required to measure it, so we don't. We're just required to send the department the numbers. Or we don't have any numbers in our KPIs. They just say, spend the money and equip the money every year. And that's what we do, because we're not required to do any more. That's a danger, isn't it? Because you don't exist to be an arm of government. You exist to be able to improve your community. So that's what you want to be measuring. Well, thank you, my friends, for your questions and comments and contributions today. If there is anyone watching who has an amazing evaluation framework that they're using to monitor and measure their outcomes, we'd love to hear from you. Just drop me a line and let me know if it's something that's share-worthy and we can get it out and about. The Specialist Homelessness Services in New South Wales are just about to, I think, launch their outcomes measurement framework, which has been a long time in the creation. So that'll be something that's going to be new that we can share when it comes out. And there are some excellent links in the resources that I'll be sharing with you shortly. Everybody wave, because it looks so good. Everybody wave. Everybody wave. Marianne.
Thanks for that.
Great session. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie.
Thanks,
Bye.
Daniela. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Carol. Good to see you all. Good to see you, Marianne. You're rocking those
Thank you.
headphones. Oh, I'm going to just stop recording now.